Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me as I present my action research. My name is Sydney Dent, and today I will be presenting my action research titled Cultiva, Cultura, Assessing Intercultural Competency in the Classroom, Incorporating Dynamic Assessment Tools. Before I begin, I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Connor and also to Dr. Liao, who have been essential in my development here at SLI. Let us begin. I will start with an introduction and a review of the literature. Upon beginning my investigation, immediately I was drawn to Byram's definition of intercultural competency. He talks about the development of knowledge, skills, awareness, and attitude. These 4 domains are going to be an essential part of understanding my research. Also, in learning about intercultural competency, Byram adds that cultural learning needs to be experiential, and the experience of difference has to be at the center of learners' and teachers' attention. Durbin adds that to develop intercultural competency, Durbin recommends for learners to focus on reflecting, specifically on intercultural experiences. Here is a model of intercultural sensitivity developed by Bennett, 1993. Here we have a spectrum, a continuum that shows how individuals can move back and forth between being ethnocentric and ethno-relative. Any individual might fit on a particular part of this continuum and can move forward or backward. Ideally, in this investigation, I'm hoping for individuals to be moving towards ethno-relative. Individuals in this stage have acceptance, adaptation, and integration when adapting to a new society or culture. In this intercultural development continuum, Hammer, 2012, shows us how individuals who are considered monocultural in their mindset will have signs of denial, polarization, and as they move to becoming more interculturally in their mindset, they will have acceptance and adaptation. Experiential learning is something that students will get to experience. Literally, that's the idea. They're experiencing the learning instead of having a traditional, this is A, B, C. They learn through the experience. So as Elola presents to us, learners who have an immersion experience typically develop a greater intercultural competence than learners who just have classroom experiences within a confined space. In 1971, there was an interesting investigation by Fiedler. He created the cultural assimilator, and this assimilator was used to see how well people adapted before going on a volunteer trip to Honduras. After the experiment, participants that completed the cultural assimilation method were more likely to adjust to their new environment abroad and were more productive workers in their volunteer positions. As Cole shares with us, the process of learning requires students to move back and forth between opposing modes of reflection and action, and the differences and disagreement drive the learning process, meaning that when students have to have some sort of challenge or there's some kind of puzzle they have to do or something that has to be completed in an organic way, people have to work through those troubles, and that's when development happens. One of the tools that I will be using in this project, and I will get to my methodology in just a moment, but I want to talk about the cross-cultural adaptability inventory because of these 4 important concepts and terms. Emotional resilience is confidence in one's ability to cope with the unfamiliar and to react positively to new experiences. This is obviously an element of someone being interculturally competent. Perceptual acuity represents one's assertiveness to interpersonal relations and to verbal and nonverbal behavior. Flexibility and openness refers to tolerance or a lack of rigidity and a liking for and comfort with all kinds of people. You can kind of sum this up to the word tolerance. Let's now take a look at personal autonomy, which describes an individual who possesses a strong sense of identity. Personal autonomy also includes the ability to maintain one's own personal values and beliefs, which means that if you went to another culture and maybe there were different religious practices or traditions than those that you are used to, you would still be able to experience those without having to sacrifice or lose your own identity that you started with. Social media will play an important role in my investigation. So let's take a look at one of the people that I researched. Erin, 2012, says that language learning and social media support students' learning experience. In Erin's study, research participants, which there were 40, completed a 5-point Likert scale questionnaire providing feedback on how social media could be used in a language class. Results indicated that the use of social network style learning made the learning experience more student-centered, which also led to better student-teacher relationships. In this particular investigation, it was important that students had a lot of buy-in in what we were going to do and that they were using technology that they were comfortable with. And that's why we went with social media. Now to my research question. Do students develop intercultural competency as a result of cultural experiential learning that was measured by the Cultiva Intercultural Competency rubric? Now to my methodology. Let's start by understanding the population of the school in which I teach. When this research was conducted, the population of Mandarin High School was 2,854 students. As you can see by this graph, the majority of students are considered Caucasian, although I want to make a particular note that Caucasian at Mandarin High School includes many first-generation students who are Albanian, Bosnian, Polish, and Romanian. So, with saying that, it is important to know that some of the people labeled as Caucasian are actually English language learners, which we will talk about later in the presentation and be using the term ELL. ELL will also include a percentage of the Hispanic population and also a portion of the African American population, as some of the African American population comes from Haiti. Let's continue. Intercultural competency in my investigation is measured in two forms, qualitative and quantitative. Part of the qualitative collection of data was used with the reflection posts that students made on social media using the first language and second language, which in this case would be considered Spanish. I do recognize that as we label them L2, for some students that are ELL, this would be their third or fourth language. During the simulation, the intervention is the simulation, students created a fictitious social media account. Some of them actually used their real accounts, and they made social media posts that were inspired by cultural experiences that we had as a class. Some of these experiences were on field trips, so not all of them were inside the classroom. So as we see, students started off with the cross-cultural adaptability inventory as a pre-survey. This is going to later be used with our quantitative data. They also completed that at the end, and this was from February to March. Students also responded to 10 open-ended survey questions. As we see here, The arrows are showing how students were reflecting in the L1 and the L2 and using social media to make those reflections. And remember that during the lit review, we talked about how it's important for students to be making those reflections while they're experiencing their learning. Then the Cultiva Cultura Intercultural Competency rubric, which is the assessment tool that I designed for this project, was used one time at the end. My sample size was 20 students. The majority of these students were freshmen and sophomores. There was one senior in our group and a couple of juniors. Let's continue. Here are the 10 sample questions. We'll take a look more closely at a few that were very influential in collecting the qualitative data. An example of questions that students saw, first there would be a theme that was established. So for example, if the theme of the cultural theme of the day might have been death in religion, specifically in Mexico. So a question that might have been asked to help prompt that reflection for students to post on their social media would be, how did the images that you saw in the basilica make you feel? Did this activity make you want to visit a basilica, iglesia, or religious site in Mexico? Why or why not? This is the rubric that I developed to help measure the 4 domains of intercultural competency: awareness, skills, knowledge, and attitude. As you see, the lowest score that a student could earn was a 50%. So as long as a student participated, we went ahead and gave them a 50%, which was minimal understanding. And an advanced understanding will take you all the way to 100%. Let's take a look a little bit closer at what an advanced understanding really means. In the awareness category, which was measured through comparison of the pre and post open-ended survey responses, student respectfully reflects on the similarities and differences between his self, herself, and the target culture. Student displays an element of curiosity to the target culture and shows cultural awareness by giving value to the differences that may exist between his self, herself, and the cultural other. In the skills domain, is measured by post, social media, in the L2. Student uses a variety of vocabulary to express descriptions of cultural concepts. Student is able to make subject-verb agreement with ser, estar, ir, querer, and or tener. As you can see, this is very specific to this cultural experience the students had. These would obviously be adaptable in the skills domain when working with different groups, specifically if you change the language and skill level. Attitude, measured by the cross-cultural adaptability inventory, which was the Likert scale that had the domains that we reviewed earlier, like emotional resilience, etc. And then the knowledge, measured through reflection posts and essay written in the L1 and or L2. Students receiving advanced understanding in this category demonstrate knowledge in the target culture by accurately depicting rituals, practices, and reflecting while they're posting. Let's move on to our data analysis. Here are some samples of social media posts. So as we can see, there are 2 famous artists, one Frida Kahlo, a Mexican painter, and also Salvador Dali. This says, yo prefiero el arte de Salvador Dalí porque es más interesante. I like Dali's art more than Frida Kahlo's because of the interesting optical illusions. And that is the same, it's written for both. This is one person's post. So as you can see, they are making a comparison between the 2 artists. In the post intervention, we can see a comparison of scores in the category of knowledge between ELL learners and non-ELL learners. The ELL learners had a median average score that was 3.5 using the Cultiva, Cultura, Intercultural Competency rubric. So their average score was higher than those who are non-ELL learners. When looking at the category of skills, we see that the ELL learners had a higher average. Although, when looking at the stats, this was not a significant difference. Let's take a look at the scores from the CCIA. In gray, we see the pre-intervention, and in black, we see the post-intervention. The only category that saw a significant difference in scores was the personal autonomy. We're going to talk about why in just a little while. When taking a look at the overall rubric scores amongst all students, we can see that all students earned an average of an 80%. Non-ELL learners had an average of 79, and English language learners had an average of 82. So when we ran the test, it was shown that there was not a significant difference between the ELL learners and the non-ELL learners. Looking at our qualitative data, non-ELL responses at pre-intervention to the open-ended question, when you hear people speak Spanish, how do you feel? The biggest category was that students felt uncomfortable. Now remember, these are non-English language learners, so that means that their first language is English. And when hearing Spanish, the majority of students felt uncomfortable. 15% felt indifferent. 23%, so nearly a quarter of the population, felt confused when they heard Spanish. And only 8% found it to be attractive. Conversely, after the intervention, we see that students who are first language is English started to have some other emotions. We see that 33% are still uncomfortable, but now 17% find it attractive. 17% are now comfortable or working towards understanding, and 25% are curious. So just going back for a moment, looking at confused or indifferent and moving towards comfortable, working towards understanding, or curious, only 8% are now confused. Non-ELL learners at post-intervention, when responding to the question, while participating in the cultural simulation, did you experience any changes in opinion? 50% said that they gained respect. 17 said, I'm still confused. 8% said they gained curiosity. 8% said, I'm still excited, because they were excited before. And 17% said, it's easier than I thought. This particular response, I gained respect. For me, this was a huge sign of growth and development as students were striving towards becoming more interculturally competent. When the ELL learners, as in the English language learners, responded to that same question, while participating in the cultural simulation, did you experience any changes in opinion? 87% said no change. 13% said that they gained appreciation. What this tells me is that students who are already having to learn a second language and are already adapting to a new culture didn't necessarily find the intervention and the stimulation to change their opinion and their perspective because they've already done it at least once before. Let's take a look at these findings. Looking at our quantitative data, we see that the overall scores for students using the Cultiva, Cultura Intercultural Competency rubric would place them in the proficient understanding level. So again, we only use the rubric at the end because it was the culmination of everything that we did. So it would be difficult to use that as a pre-score. And we see that proficient understanding level is the average, the mean, between all students. After doing a two-tailed sample t-test, comparing how the ELL and the non-ELLs grew or did not grow, we see that there was no significant change between these two groups. When looking specifically at the CCIA, which was the Likert scale inventory that was used pre and post, it was very interesting because it came out with the exact same average score. So there was no significant change. It was when I was collecting and analyzing this data that there really began to emerge a separation between the ELL learners and the non-ELL learners. Also when analyzing the qualitative data. But it was first going through this data that made the ELL component become an active part of my investigation. I was not originally looking at that, but it was very apparent that this would become significant. The only category that there was a significant change was personal autonomy. And this may be because individuals who are at the stage of acceptance and adaptation of intercultural competency should be able to conceptualize cultural products and practices in the target culture without losing sight of the recognition of their own culture. So this stage for students, they might not have had enough time, they might have been struggling, and their identity might have been completely shifted because of the experience, and therefore their personal autonomy scores were lower. When looking at the qualitative data, it was so great to see responses move from EDK, which is I don't know, to things like they were interested in struggles and living conditions of the target culture. Recommendations. This rubric in its current state lacks validity and reliability because it is only a prototype. But I have some recommendations for the simulation. I think it would be great to have more scaffolding with the materials, and also to use hashtags so that students can connect to one another, but also to native speakers. And the limitations, the rubric in its current state, again, lacks validity and reliability. Short term was difficult to measure a lot of change. This is a really big deal, becoming more interculturally competent. So we need more time. And also the sample size, especially when we divided between ELL and non-ELL, became very small. And we need a bigger sample size to have even more reflection. My research question asks whether or not students developed interculturally as a result of experiential learning as measured by the CCICR. The median level achieved within the class sample was proficient understanding, but it did not produce findings that showed that my rubric could accurately indicate changes in IC. This investigation did not provide evidence as to how much students developed over the course of the 6-week intervention. But here's where there's hope, and I'm so excited that the Cultiva, Cultura Intercultural Competency rubric produced a first step towards creating a tool that assesses intercultural competency. Thank you so much for joining me as we got to take a look at assessment tools that will help us grow interculturally, and I look forward to more investigations on this topic. Thank you.